Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also thank you for being here with us. The future of hydrogen in Asia Pacific will be our theme. My name is Bernd Heid. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey, and I lead hydrogen and our platform for climate technologies globally. And I sit in the board of the Center for Hydrogen Innovation here in Singapore, hosted by the NUS. So today we have a panel discussion on the future of hydrogen. And the theme of the Ecosperity Week is Accelerate Action at Scale. And we will see all three of that. So we see the acceleration that we see in the hydrogen economy. We see action to real projects, not only planned projects. And also, we will see that happening at scale. So we are beyond the phase of pilot projects and now seeing more and more happening at scale. So before we get started, let me share a few of the facts on the state of the hydrogen economy that we worked on together with the Hydrogen Council. And first of all, the main question that we always get is like, why hydrogen? What is different this time? We have seen that before. Are we sure that hydrogen really plays a role right now? And what you see here is the world map, which is color-coded on future energy sources. And in the transition to a clean energy world, we will see new places coming up with renewable energy. And the world looks different than our energy distribution on the planet today. So we will see new renewables hub coming up, but we also see that natural gas still plays a role in the transition. Natural gas in combination with carbon capture and sequestration will play a role in this energy distribution. So what you see here, and that's the reason why we need hydrogen. You see a lot of these renewable hubs. They're Australia, that's India, that's part of Middle East, North Africa, or Chile in Latin America, where you see future clean energy being developed. But a lot of the industrial sites are not changing at all. So we still need energy massively in Japan, Korea, China, Europe, or North America. And that's also the reason why hydrogen comes into play. Electrons are great if you can directly use them. But if not, electrons have one disadvantage. You cannot transport them well over long distance, and you cannot store them well over longer time. So that's where hydrogen comes into play as an energy vector. So hydrogen is basically the missing link to connect future energy sources and energy sinks. So that's the reason why we also see hydrogen being deployed at scale. And here's a view on like the global trade, how it will be evolving. We are currently working on a fact-based analysis with the members of the Hydrogen Council, so bear with us until COP27 to see the final results. But already two messages that I would love to convey for our discussion here in Asia today is like, it's Asia really needs the trade and the connecting of hydrogen sources and sinks. If you look at Asia, we will not be able to basically bridge or export Australian sunshine. We will not be able to export out of Middle East into Asia if it's not for the trading of hydrogen and its derivatives. And we will not be able to import energy into Korea and Japan without hydrogen as a vector. Or think of even China. China has a lot of renewable energy, but we need to bridge the West and the East in China. So that is where we see trade and where we see also hydrogen playing a role as an energy vector. And Southeast Asia, and here in Singapore, I think will play a critical role in an emerging hydrogen hub. So basically, going from a fossil-based hub into a renewable hub or a hub of clean fuels. And the second message that I would love to convey is this: when we speak of hydrogen, it can be hydrogen as a molecule, liquid or in a gaseous form. but it is also its derivatives. So therefore, think of hydrogen is more than just the molecule. It can be also methanol, ammonia, or synthetic fuel, or even DRI, where we use hydrogen to reduce iron ore to DRI, and then basically ship iron ore-based DRI. So let us look at a couple of projects. And what you see here is a world map with the projects that we see around the globe. So 680 projects with a total of 240 billion of investments. If we just look at what is already in a feasibility state, it's 110 billion out of the 240, or even if we look at projects that are more mature and have passed the FID mark or are already in building, that's 22 billion out of the 240. So the majority is still at a planning stage. But what I would love to highlight is, if you look back, and I gave a similar speech on the global projects in Glasgow, COP26, 6 months ago. The numbers I showed were 520 projects and 160 billion. 520 compared to 680, 160 compared to 240 billion now. So that's an additional 50% just in the past 6 months. Of course, a lot of that is still in feasibility, but it shows that we see the acceleration of these projects evolving. Let me highlight a few, especially here in Asia. So there is Hystra, that's connecting Australia to Japan with a liquid hydrogen infrastructure. There are companies in Saudi Arabia that produce green ammonia to basically export that to Japan. Look at the Western Green Energy Hub in Australia. That is a project that is aiming at 50 gigawatts, 50, of solar energy to be converted into hydrogen and its derivatives. Look at Oman. We have 25 gigawatts planned renewable power to be converted into hydrogen. And look at projects like High Energy in Australia, 8 gigawatts of hydrogen production. But it's beyond the production. We have companies out of Japan and Korea that are exporting fuel cells in cars, trucks, and buses. And we also have Korean and Japanese utilities that import ammonia to co-fire in their power plants. And we see decarbonization projects happening already in Australia, where we have mines being decarbonized and you have zero-emission dump trucks. And last but not least, we have a lot of projects that start aiming at decarbonizing petrochemical industry, or think of replacing gray hydrogen in the refineries with green or blue. So if we look at that, let me turn to our panelists. And first, I would love to turn to Alicia. Alicia, you're the president of Intercontinental Energy, a company that does not only announce projects, but you walk the talk. Your company is putting things into action, and you are the leading developer of green hydrogen and green ammonia production facility. By far the greatest capacity of announcements in the region, and some of them are also the furthest advanced. Alicia, share with us exactly what you are planning to do.
Great, thanks, Bernd. As you said, Intercontinental Energy focuses on green hydrogen, green ammonia projects. We started out, though, as a baseline to find the least expensive renewables that have a diurnal profile to offset the intermittency issues that you typically encounter. So all of our projects are coastal deserts. They're very large, 25 gigawatts plus. So we have 2 in Western Australia. He mentioned one of them, one in Oman, one in Saudi Arabia. All of the sites have this diurnal profile of a lot of sun during the day and a lot of wind at night, which it causes a more baseline production of energy that's more reliable. With that more reliable energy, you can run the downstream equipment much more easily to make hydrogen and then to make ammonia. So all of the projects will provide green electrons to the local area. In all cases, they're not attached to a grid, but they can provide for expanding cities around the projects. They'll also be able to provide hydrogen for any industries that are using it. Iron ore beneficiation is one thing that Bernd mentioned for Australia, or for iron. If it's going to be exported, then we believe ammonia is the best carrier. That's the best vector that we've seen, the least expensive and has no greenhouse gas emissions if handled correctly. So all of our projects are following that pathline. We see Japan and Korea really driving the market in Asia in terms of demand for co-firing, but also for shipping. And we see Singapore playing a really active role in being an ammonia bunkering hub, and also participating in a lot of these studies so that we can figure out what is the best way that all of these different entities can get together, dovetail our roadmaps, and deliver the clean energy in time.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Daryl. Daryl is the Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council. The Hydrogen Council, for those of you who are not familiar with that organization, is a CEO-led organization. They all share the same vision of bringing a hydrogen society to life. So by now, that's subsume 140 companies, all leaders in their respective fields, many Asian companies, and also many of you are sitting here in the room. So if you add up the market valuation of these companies, we are at a 10 trillion mark. So 10 trillions that you are representing. So Daryl, it's fair to say that you are the voice of the industry. So last week, there was a gathering of the CEOs in Washington, D.C. Actually, Alicia and I just come from there. We were there with you. Daryl, share with us what you learned from your conversation with the CEOs, and how do you see this ecosystem evolving?
Thanks, Bernd. It's really good to be with all of you today. Lots of excitement in this field, and Bernd and Alicia have already shared about the expectation of many of these projects. But you know, the biggest challenge is the climate doesn't know anything's happened yet. All of these announcements and projects are still pending. 88% of them have still not hit final investment decision. And so in our discussion last week, we were talking about why are we stuck and what do we need to have happen here? One of the key items that was raised is the need for security of demand. So without customers, there's no business. And notwithstanding all kinds of supply, there needs to be demand and offtake for these projects so that there's a full story all the way from supply through demand and end use so that the projects can be realized. And we can start to work off that 51 billion tons of GHG emissions that need to be mitigated. There's a lot of work to do here. And so we need to get these projects on the move. One of the most important things is the role of both industry and government to come together. So I'm not sharing today an expectation that one side or the other side is not doing their job, but both sides need to come together to make these projects actual reality. And there's still some critical policy elements in many jurisdictions where there's not clear certainty of demand and companies can move into that final investment decision. If you ask where the leaders are today, it's Korea and China. This is where the incentives are actually in the market. The funding that's being made available by governments is actually flowing, and real projects are transpiring and starting to actually make an impact. And we need more of that actuality to flow in more jurisdictions around the world. As I said, out of that portfolio of projects that Bernd talked about, 88% are still pending final investment decision. That's a big concern.
Thank you, Daryl. And maybe let's turn to Alicia. Daryl says that this is still going to happen. How do you see the movie playing out and the ecosystem evolving here in Asia?
Well, I think with the exception of Australia, there are not a lot of coastal deserts. So Middle East technically is in Asia, but if we say Asia-Pac, then we can include Australia. So I see Australia as being one of the only hydrogen exporters in whatever vector. But I think that there are a lot of roles that can be played by different countries in Asia. First, in the supply chain, I think electrolyzers can be produced in Thailand, in Vietnam. They are going to be produced in India. Solar panels can be produced in different places to diversify that supply store. There are also different types of renewables. So you maybe don't have the deserts for the diurnal profile, but if you're making hydrogen locally, and it's for your local use, and you're replacing a generator that's using filthy diesel, it would be both cheaper and better for the environment to do it yourself, even if your renewables are not quite the best. So in Indonesia, you might have small hydro. In a number of places, you will have solar. Maybe not wind, and maybe the solar isn't so consistent, so you have a little bit less capacity factor, but it still would be less expensive than diesel, and obviously less pollutive. So for a number of these island areas, I think that makes sense. I think that Korea, as well as Korea and Japan, are developing a lot of different technologies that can advance us further with all the different raw materials and then the supply chain. And also Korea is doing shipbuilding. So one of the biggest, earliest markets that we see is for shipping. We have joined the Getting to Zero coalition that Global Maritime put together, and that is a commitment for all the shipping companies to use 5% of their fuel as hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives by 2030. Most of those companies want to use much more than 5%. So I think, and a lot of them are in Asia. And Korea will be building ammonia ships, Japan maybe as well. And of course, again, Singapore is playing a really important role as a bunkering hub, and also just working together with all these entities so that we can get the regulations and the incentives and potentially sticks also involved, so that everyone is incentivized to create green solutions for their particular problems.
Thank you. Daryl, you said projects are not as fast developing as they should be. Where do you see the major obstacles, or what is needed to speed up that process?
Leadership is absolutely critical. It's great we have Alicia on this panel because she's one of the leaders that's taking action, taking risk, and entrepreneurial leadership is a really critical commodity at a critical time of change like this. So I think leadership is certainly critical, entrepreneurship. But then the large corporate players are also looking at this and acting into it. And there's a massive capacity in the existing energy companies that as that turns and focuses on the critical urgency of climate change, all of that industrial power, project management, and capability, as it's turned on this problem, it will also make a difference. So we need leadership on the government side from entrepreneurs like Alicia and from major corporates to all come together. Now, we've seen this movie before. Renewable energy moved ultimately a lot faster than anyone anticipated. I think, Bernd, your numbers that you were sharing last week suggested that we may need to go even 4 times as fast as the renewable industry moved. Now, understand that times have changed, and the sense of urgency, I think, is up substantially. Notwithstanding the negativity of the pandemic and the unfortunate war that's going on, these things have served to really drive a greater sense of urgency to get on with mitigating climate change. So I'm optimistic. It's a massive job. We need to move a lot faster than we are now, but perhaps we'll be up to it.
Thank you. And you're also submitting questions here, and let me pick on some of the questions that we get from the audience. I think this is a great question for you, Alicia. So this regarding the uptake in different investments on blue versus green. Is actually blue versus green, is that a debate? Is green the better hydrogen than blue? Do we see both? What's your view on that?
I think we're definitely going to see both. I think eventually green will be cheaper than blue, but that's eventually. It's not today. I mean, maybe today because the price of fossil fuels today is extremely high due to the war. But I think one of the benefits green has for the long term is that the projects can predict what the price will be for the whole 20-year, 25-year offtake agreement, I mean, people can actually know what the price of their fuel will cost for the next 20 years, as opposed to being tied to Henry Hub or any other formula that includes fossil fuels as your base. So I think that is an advantage. But in the short term and medium term, there are lots of natural resources, natural gas, and there's carbon capture and carbon capture use proposals, which makes a great stopgap. I mean, those I think are easier to get off the ground faster, and I think they'll play a big role in the intermediate market future.
Daryl, is it then actually a right thing to still color code the molecules that are either way colorless, or is that rather confusing? What's your view on that? How will that evolve?
I wish I could have back all the time that I've wasted on this discussion the last 12 months and focus on solving the problem. The colors were invented to help educate through some of the complexity of hydrogen, but really they're not serving a useful purpose any longer. And I can show you blue projects that are way cleaner than green projects. So they're actually misleading as well. The critical thing is to have a transparent methodology, which gives us the ability to trace the actual carbon footprint of the hydrogen wherever it originates from. And there's been work over the last couple of years by the International Program on Hydrogen Energy, a consortium of countries from around the world that's looked at a methodology to account for the life cycle analysis of the carbon footprint for hydrogen sources. We need some standardized methods so that we can have transparent accountability about hydrogen origination. And that will open up a level playing field for trade, some clarity and transparency for countries as they export and import hydrogen. So we kind of need to move away from the colors and get the job done.
Thank you. And here's a question: are we actually scaling fast enough? What happens, or what are the implications from the energy crisis? Is that an accelerator or a decelerator for the hydrogen economy?
I think it's absolutely an accelerator. It just reminds people of the uncertainty of such a crucial element for most industries or households. So I think that with renewables and with different blue, I guess, for lack of let's say, low carbon or clean options that are dispatchable and can be stored easily, like hydrogen and ammonia, I think that offers a lot more opportunity for people and countries to source from, if they can't produce it themselves, from more reliable partners, or to change those partners if there is no, if there are problems. So I think it would be, Germany, for instance, I think would be in a better position in the future to choose from different importing energy options versus their current situation. And I think the war has also shown that the pricing is highly unreliable, and even when the pricing falls, it can do a lot of damage. So just having some sort of clarity on what your pricing is, that encourages investment. And anything we can do to provide clarity, which includes regulations, as Daryl was speaking of, that makes the investor understand what kind of return they're going to get, and they're more likely to come in.
Thank you. You both mentioned that this is about ecosystems and collaboration between private sector and public sector. Let me touch upon that point for a bit. What is actually the ask that you as an industry group have towards governments around the globe? Is it synchronization? I'm sure it's not just plain subsidies. How is that discussion unfolding? Daryl, maybe we start with you.
Well, there's 3 points here. First of all, the offering of funding that's been put up already, and it's not a small amount, it's 100 billion of funding that's been put up around the world. Often that's taking too long to move actually into the hands of the project proponents. We've had a list of projects selected for more than a year now in Europe, and yet the funding has yet to flow. This is a big concern and somewhat unnecessary. We need to move to action quickly on the funding. This is where Korea and China are actually getting it right. Their funding is actually in the market now. Secondly, are these issues around demand certainty, demand signals. So regulation is a tool that government has. And if it's used artfully and merit order in those areas where hydrogen can make the biggest impact, it can actually unlock the demand and start things moving so that the whole story is there, supply and demand together. The last thing is, unfortunately, in some areas, we still have a situation where governments are complicating the situation. Right now, there's discussion in Europe how it's just far too difficult to put up new renewable energy installations. And so there was a piece of work put forward on the Repower program for Europe to talk about how we need to make it easier for renewable energy to go in place. But at the very same time, in the very same piece of initiative, was this additionality principle that's been put forward, which actually makes the whole process for deploying hydrogen more difficult. We need to be careful not to get in our own way and put up new roadblocks to make this thing more complicated than it is already. So those are the three things: get the funding moving, get the demand signals out so that there's certainty for offtake and demand, and finally, let's make sure not to make it any more complicated than we have to.
Thank you. And let me build on that coupling of supply and demand, because that's the real challenge that we have. So if you talk to developers like you, the question is always, if for lack of offtake, basically these projects are not bankable. And at the same time, somebody on the demand side needs a stable, low-cost hydrogen to actually be able to have a positive business case on the application, because otherwise you could go with a different alternative. So in absence of a liquid market, what are the mechanisms, or how is that being dealt with, or what do you wish in terms of like coupling of this supply and demand? Does that need to go in lockstep, or how do you see that?
I think it will develop in much the same way as LNG. So you will start with these large offtake agreements. That's certainly the way that we are approaching it. We have very large projects. They will be project financed. They will have offtakes from 1 to 3 different entities, and there will be long-term contracts. Eventually, you'll get to more of a merchant market, a spot market. When it's it's more mature. But in order to build these very large projects, I think a standard project finance model is more appropriate. And we've already seen JERA has put out an RFP for green ammonia. Japan has a green ammonia purchasing office. As I said, the shipping community has been speaking a lot about the demand that they have for green options derived from hydrogen. So I think there are a lot of demand. There is a lot of demand in the market, much more than supply. So as we get closer to FID and building out these projects, I think we will certainly be announcing offtake agreements, and I think others will be as well.
Thank you.
And Bernd, you won't mind me mentioning the brilliance of Germany at this point, your home country. Germany put up the H2 Global scheme, where there's a double auction and contract for difference, stimulating demand for projects on the supply side, stimulating demand for offtake on the downstream side, and then offering a mechanism for bankability and finance in the middle in this contract for difference. This is emerging as a bit of a model because it works across the whole value chain and activates activity. Much of the trade discussion that's going on in the world today has actually been led off by this very brilliant initiative from Germany called H2 Global.
I would argue that everything that Germany does on energy policy is very rational. So therefore, we have a good example here. Let us hit 2 more questions and really try to get them quickly. So one question says, what are the biggest competitors to hydrogen? Is it at all a legitimate question, or is it more about the complementary? Who wants to take that?
I'll take that one. I think it's definitely not an either or, it's an and. And it's not just with electric versus hydrogen, or it's the same with 3rd generation biofuels versus hydrogen, or basically we need everything to work. This is not, hydrogen is not a silver bullet, but it is very good for a number of very difficult to decarbonize sectors. And so we will use that for that, and for other applications, if electricity and a grid with electricity that is green or clean is available, then you would use that technology. But there's so many applications. I think there's plenty of room for all types of players and technologies.
And one last question. What is the net benefit of hydrogen once we look at the energy chain end to end? I think this comes a little bit back to that energy system question. Daryl, maybe that last question to you.
Yeah, this is a piece that we're working on currently in the council, and we don't have a full answer for you today, but we hope to later in the year. There are many system benefits as hydrogen stitches our energy system together. We've gone a long time with 3 silos: electricity to keep the lights on, liquid fuels to get around, and gas to stay warm. And what hydrogen does is it starts to bring our energy system into indeed a fully integrated system with many benefits. So picture how much better off the electrical system is with large-scale energy storage offered by hydrogen. Think about how we can move much more quantities of energy into transport using hydrogen than just with electrons. So there are many system benefits that come with using hydrogen, and it's on us to tell that story and make it clear. And that's a piece of work that the council is working on for 2022.
Thank you both. I think we could go on for another hour without getting bored. So maybe let me share some takeaways. At least I learned a lot in our conversation today. So number one, I think hydrogen is real. It's not just an hype, but at the same time it requires effort. It's not something that goes without a coordinated action. 2, I learned that hydrogen is a great opportunity for the region in Asia Pacific. That's clear, not only on the production side, but also on the offtake side. We need hydrogen to bridge that gap. But also here, the role of the various countries, you mentioned a few, I think has to be shaped and developed over time. That's another learning I have. And the third one is we heard a lot from you both on the coordinated action, not only within the private sector among players in large-scale deployment projects where you have really an ecosystem being put at place, but also I heard a lot on the coordination between private sector and public sector to basically go in sync. And this is not something that an individual country can solve, but this is something that really happens on a global scale. So we need also that coordination among countries to get the hydrogen economy going. So thank you very much, both of you. It has been a pleasure, and thanks for your insights.
Thanks, Bernd.
Thank you very much, Bernd and Alicia and Daryl. So much food for thought. Thank you very much for that, and perfectly summarized. I don't need any of these notes, Bernd. That was phenomenal.